This week in On the Go, the Cross Bay Ferry. Does travel by water hold the key to easing many of our transportation needs?
If there's frequency, reliability, and utilizing another method from getting to point A to point B, I would imagine that the ferry service would do incredibly well.
Hello and welcome to On the Go, the TBARTA podcast where we discuss the latest in transit and transportation throughout Tampa Bay. I'm your host, TBARTA Communications Director Chris Jadek. The Cross Bay Ferry has been in operation for several years, with a new season about to begin on October 1st. Up until now, it has been more of a leisure service, but ferries around the world, including the U.S., play a major role in daily commuter transit, and ferry advocates see that same potential here, given how much water surrounds Tampa, St. Petersburg, and Clearwater. With us today to discuss those possibilities is Hillsborough County Commissioner Kimberly Overman. She is the current chair of the commission, and in addition to many responsibilities, she also serves on TBARTA's board as the Hillsborough Transit Authority representative. Commissioner, thank you for finding time to talk with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Chris. I am all about transportation, so I enjoy having these conversations.
Thank you. Before we get into the ferry, I want to ask a broader question on your philosophy regarding the future direction of Hillsborough County. Many may not know your background as a certified financial planner and CEO of an investment advisory exchange. Your biography describes you as, and I quote here, a longtime advocate of smart planning, economic growth, strong families, sustainable communities, and the importance of education. Would you like to expand on that a little bit and tell us how that impacts the work you do as county commissioner?
It actually is used every day in everything I do. As you may be aware, I serve as the chair of the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. I serve on all of the transportation-related boards. And as a county commissioner, one of the roles that a county commissioner does is work on land use and our comprehensive planning. So we're constantly looking at how we are made up in our community, how it is developed in the past, what entitlements we have to live with, and then how do we go about addressing the fact that we have so many people moving here to Hillsborough County? The good news is we recovered well from COVID, and that is causing many people to look to Hillsborough County as a place to live, work, and play. And so every day, the commissioners make policy decisions and funding decisions on how to invest in our communities so that they thrive. That is our job. And as a consequence of that, we're constantly looking at ways that how we're going to grow, what we need to do to help the economy either recover and or grow. And then what do we do to help our businesses and our families thrive? That's the importance of everything. And it helps people not only want to live here, but it also realizes when we grow very quickly, we have to deal with that too. So the deficit that we have currently in what we have invested in transportation on a local level is really coming home to roost. And so we're working very hard at fixing that problem.
You have a lot of challenges and responsibilities, and certainly the growth we're going to see in the next few years is opportunity, but also a challenge. So I commend you for that work. Regarding the ferry project itself, today in Tampa Bay, the ferry still feels novel. And to me, that's a little odd, given how much coastline surrounds our major population areas. New York, Seattle, San Francisco, those are just a few cities with daily commuter ferry service that serves both leisure and employment needs. It's 2022, and our transportation needs have well been documented. Why hasn't ferry service happened here sooner?
Well, unfortunately, we're living with a history of very car-centric thought. Not only do we not have ferries, which would make total sense, we don't have transit in general. We have HART, which is our transit agency, that is the most underfunded, smallest transit system, I think, in the nation, given the size of Hillsborough County. We have not made a commitment to anything other than roads, even to the extent that we haven't necessarily designed roads that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists. What we are doing now is trying to right that ship. And one of the ways to do that, in addition to, investing in our transit so that more people can use alternative ways to get around, is to look into how we could take advantage of the fact that we have so much water in the area and make it easy to get from one place to another when it's very hard when you go through the middle of the urban core to get anywhere in Hillsborough County.
We celebrate the water, and certainly it can also be a great asset for us as well. Well, let's turn our attention to the Cross Bay Ferry as it is now. As background, the ferry was launched as a pilot project in September 2016, a partnership between Hillsborough County, Pinellas County, St. Petersburg, and Tampa. It's had some starts and stops along the way. The good news is it had record ridership last year. It resumes in October. The partnership continues and now includes FDOT, and there's a vision for much more. Can you give us a brief overview on this coming season? What ferry riders can expect regarding service?
Well, the good news is the ferry is doing incredibly well, and FDOT is helping subsidize some of the cost of making sure that it's available. We've also gotten a very wonderful grant through the help of Congresswoman Castor in order to assist us in obtaining another boat that handles many more riders. And FDOT recognizes that even though it may seem like a tourist opportunity, we have to recognize our economy is largely driven by our tourism industry and the culture and the arts and the many wonderful things that are going on in the Tampa Bay area. As a consequence of that, the ferry has really been a great asset to help people move from one part of our region to another. The ferry ride between St. Petersburg and downtown Tampa is certainly well appreciated, and not only for our sports, but also for our culture. For example, I had been attending a concert over in St. Petersburg, and when I drove over there, I realized there was the ferry, and I should have used that to be able to get back and forth. It would have been a much more pleasant experience than fighting traffic all the way across the Howard Franklin. So the ferry service can continue to expand. What would really be nice if we were able to actually have another location to pick up individuals. And that's coming. We're not quite there yet, but it's being definitely explored to have a South County location, initially for our military, but ultimately for the general public as well.
I do want to get into that a little later because that's very exciting. And before we discuss that long-range potential, including that much-discussed route connecting South Hillsborough County with MacDill Air Force Base, we should give some time to detailing how this public-private partnership works. Hillsborough County does not own or operate any vessels. That is done by HMS Ferry. What are the roles and responsibilities for each party in this arrangement?
Well, it's my understanding that HMS Ferry has taken on the operational risk of making sure that the boats operate, are maintained, and are able to take on the manpower it takes for any transit system. Oftentimes, the most expensive part of any transit system is the manpower to make sure that it runs when it's supposed to be there, it gets there on time, and it gets there safely so that the ridership can actually achieve their goal, which is to get from point A to point B, or maybe NC and D, depending on how it goes. So HMS Ferry has initially offered to take on the operational risk, which is a pretty significant risk. But with that, it also takes a partnership on the landing zones. In other words, where the ferry arrives and where it leaves, making sure that we have the ability to manage the fare going on and off and make it easy for riders to take advantage of it. And then, of course, there's all the regulatory associated with it. So the counties have to invest in making sure that there's a good landing zone. And that's where the city of Tampa and Hillsborough, St. Petersburg, and maybe someday Pinellas can assist us in making sure that we have a good zone that is a landing zone that is stable and well maintained so that there's a good rider experience.
Well, so far and for the coming year, the Cross Bay Ferry has been seasonal. It starts in the fall, ends in the spring, and is not yet developed into an ongoing and frequent commuter service. But there are plans to evolve that into a permanent year-round service. Most notably, that's the potential of a new route connecting South County to MacDill Air Force Base. Those who are familiar with Tampa Bay's geography can understand that it's a long drive up US 41 or I-75 then taking the Leroy Selman west to downtown before heading back south. Last month, the Hillsborough Commission voted in favor of spending $252,000 on planning and engineering assessments for that route. Can you tell us more on where that project stands and the rationale?
Well, the good news is that it's a transit asset. One, it's an investment in transit. It also qualifies as a fixed guideway because there's nothing that impedes from one location to another other than water. The port could actually interrupt that if they should choose to because of the channel traffic. But fortunately, that's not been the case. So the planning to make sure that that is protected, that the yacht has the opportunity to move back and forth between its various different stops. And what's really exciting about the opportunity of developing a route from South County to McDill is that it actually opens the door for many of the residents that not only live in the Fishhawk Riverview area, but it also opens the door for us to be able to potentially develop a military community that makes sense. Military personnel have a travel voucher that typically is part of their compensation, and using that will assist them in offsetting the cost. In addition to that, they also have access to the van pool that they use to carpool to get from, say, Fishhawk or other areas to McDill, which is on a peninsula. So being able to look at those various different benefits that are available for military for getting from place to place is helpful. What's really important, though, is that for those individuals that live in the south part of the county, having access to a ferry that could rapidly get to McDill Air Force Base is actually a method of making sure that we're able to address the security risk of not being able to get personnel to McDill in a rapid fashion. As you know, the commute from, say, Brandon, Fishhawk, Riverview to McDill is a significantly long route. And during rush hour, it's even worse. And our airmen and women need to be able to get those planes in the air. And the time delay could cause a risk that we do not want to face. So the good news is long-term, as this opportunity exists, does provide not only an opportunity for families that live in the south and east part of the county, but it also allows us to really address the risk that we have when our military personnel can't get to the base quickly.
No, it's very well said. And I think we all can appreciate supporting the men and women who work out at McDill. If this goes as planned, is there a timeline when McDill service could begin?
It still may be, unfortunately, a couple of years. As we know, with any transportation investment, actually, most people don't know, it takes forever. A fixed guideway investment, normally it takes anywhere from 5 to 7 years to develop. If it's actually involved in something like rail, where you have right of way and it's a much larger project than, say, the ferry, that could be as long as 12 years. The good news is this one's been in the works for a bit, and we're moving it along as rapidly as we possibly can. I met with McDill last week to talk about housing and the challenges, and they're very excited about the opportunity of having a stop at McDill with the ferry in order to facilitate getting their workforce on site. So I think that if there's ever an opportunity for this timeline to get short, this is one of them.
This is it. I hope we can take advantage of that for sure. A McDill connection would seem to be of great benefit to workers on the base. Do you have any studies or information or done any analysis which demonstrates the impact ferry service would have on roadways, lowering the number of cars going back and forth each day, which would benefit many of us?
Well, if we're able to use the large vessel, the one that carries 350 passengers, and we're able to use the van pool that actually will allow as many as 12 to 20, depending on the size of the vans, in order to have folks commute from the residential areas to the ferry site in South County, that should actually take potentially 350 cars off the road for every trip. And since you're able to make the trip only takes about 15 minutes, maybe 20 for loading and unloading. That means about every 15 to 20 minutes, you're going to see a ferry moving back and forth and moving 350 cars off the road. So that will definitely help for those that have sat in that traffic They don't see 350 cars. They see a lot less than that while they're sitting at a light waiting for it to change.
Should the service expand to MacDill, who's going to be responsible for the parking, the so-called first mile, last mile accommodations? Is that part of the government coalition responsibility or HMS Ferry? Where does that fall?
The actual land in the south part of the county has been offered by Mosaic. It's actually Mosaic property. They've offered it as a long-term lease for pennies, if I'm not mistaken. So they actually own the land in that location, which makes it a little more affordable because you don't actually have to buy the land on, waterfront property is never the cheapest, right? So there's the good news. The bad news is you still have to actually allow for vehicles to get there. So where we can actually use transit or carpooling to assist in reducing the number of vehicles that park there, there still needs to be places for people to drive independently there. And so the county has to do not only the design and the installation and the development of the property itself, because it will be an agreement between Mosaic and the county, is my understanding, but making the actual investment on the facility for which not only is the ticket stop, the place to be able to purchase your ticket or to process your transit voucher has to be built. And the parking area also needs to be built. And if anybody's ever built a parking lot, you know how much that costs. So the county is looking at ways that we can invest in that efficiently, but also make sure that as that MacDill stop, as we want to call it, or the stop in South County that services MacDill, continues to grow in interest. The folks that live in South County are going to be very interested in using it, not to just go to MacDill, but also to go to downtown Tampa as well as to St. Petersburg. So there will be a need to actually understand the level of investment that it will take to be able to address the number of vehicles that individually drive there. And that's part of what the planning is being done at the moment.
Well, you talked about the grant a little earlier, and I want to go back and touch on that a little bit more. Earlier this year, there was big news, as you mentioned. Hillsborough Transit Authority, HART, landed a $4.9 million grant, which is going to go toward a new 350 passenger vessel. How is that going to work? Sometimes there's matching funds, there's other things, other hurdles you have to meet. Where does that stand?
Well, the good news, bad news is that's a lot of money to go towards a very expensive vehicle. It moves a lot of people, but it's not a small expense. And with any transportation investment, that's a federal investment or a federal grant, there is anywhere from a 10 to 50% match that's required of local dollars. And part of the reason why the referendum in November is very important, not just for the ferry, but also for any of our federal dollars that are available through the infrastructure bill, those federal monies. If Hillsborough is going to be able to take advantage of any of those dollars, Hillsborough has to come up with the local match, depending on the project. And without that referendum, without that sales tax referendum, Hillsborough County will miss out on a majority of that federal infrastructure money and miss out on the 50% that could potentially be matched by the federal government for the dollar expense, and the 25% match that often is available through the state. FDOT's has been willing to come up with it so far, but to match this kind of investment, it takes a local match of approximately 25% in general. And so when we went through the various different levels of grant applications available for this project, it's all over the map. Some are 10%, some are 20%, some are 50%. But it's going to take a joint effort between the federal, the state, and the local dollars in order to make any transportation project work, and specifically in transit in general. So having the local match that would be made possible by investing in our future transportation through voting for that referendum is a key element of what's going to drive success for this project.
Well, typically public transit is supported in part, at least, by public funding. Ed Taranchik, the former county commissioner who now works for HMS Ferry, has talked about the ferry becoming financially self-sufficient. Do you share that same vision, or is this transit going to need ongoing government support?
Well, just like roads, they take ongoing support all the time. We have to resurface them, we have to redesign them, we have to do, all transportation is publicly funded. Very little of it, even our expressways that are funded by THEA and other organizations are supported with local dollars. And yes, there are ways that you can have many transportation investments become somewhat self-sufficient, but that's a challenge. That is definitely a challenge because of the need for maintenance, the need for manpower, the fact that nobody works for what they worked for 10 years ago. And so it oftentimes will become necessary for the government to fund transportation in general. In this particular case, given the model, however, the funding model that's been proposed by HMS, it is more likely to become much more self-sufficient than many other transit options that we have available to us.
Well, that's certainly encouraging and good news. Let's talk for a minute about the partnership. As I understand it, the interlocal agreement, which runs 3 more years, allows any of the partners to withdraw, and that's what Pinellas County did earlier this year, until it could renegotiate a smaller contribution. Up until then, the 4 partner governments equally share the subsidy responsibility. But in withdrawing, Pinellas County cited statistics showing only about 5% of ferry ridership came from unincorporated Pinellas County, which was part of their reasoning that the Pinellas County share should be lower. Ultimately, that's what happened. A new agreement was reached, with the difference being made up by a new contribution from FDOT. I won't ask you to get into all those details. There's no Pinellas County representative here to provide any context, but it's a good illustration of the challenges local officials face when broader regional considerations come in conflict with your obligation to represent what is best for your local constituency. How do locally elected officials, such as yourself, best handle projects with regional implications?
Oftentimes it's very difficult to understand why there's a benefit to invest in anything, especially if we're not sure what the true impacts are. But when you really look at what the return on investment of our entertainment, our sports, our culture, and the cost time of sitting in a car, the cost of operating a car, frequently it's easy to justify investing in something as easy as the ferry is when it comes to getting from point A to point B. The challenge is getting to the point A or point B. And since our entire region is congested right now, our local road network is challenged right now, I would assume that many of the riders that come from the broader Pinellas County, as well as Hillsborough, have decided just to drive because it's just as difficult to get to where the ferry stops may be, given that both of them are in dense urban areas. But it does offer an alternative. And the difficulty there is helping each of our representatives understand what that means to our community. Some folks just don't believe in investing in, the orchestra or football or baseball, any of the above, right? Why do we want to do any of that? Well, largely because it does benefit, creates jobs, and creates economic benefit to the entire region. How people value it is going to be different. So how do we do that? We negotiate with each other. We bring wisdom and information to the table and try to find a common ground to understand why it's important to invest in our communities regionally and locally.
Very well said. I appreciate that. And as it regards future expansion, do you think the public would use the ferry as a daily commuter service between Hillsborough and Pinellas counties, and in the process, reduce traffic on our bridges?
I would imagine if it were available, people would use it. That is the opportunity. I would much prefer if there was frequency, which is what transit wins and lives on. If there's frequency, reliability, and utilizing another method from getting to point A to point B, and at that point, when you get to point A or B, there's additional transit access so that they can move to other areas that are beyond walking distance from those point A's or point B's. I would imagine that the ferry service would do incredibly well. Now, I think one of the challenges we also have is that we're in an area where storms come up. And the good news is the ferry, which I've actually been on it when it got pretty nasty in weather, does really well. But our roads don't. So while it may seem as though it would be a little difficult to run a ferry given our weather, it actually is not any harder than it is trying to drive on our roads during a thunderstorm.
That's a good point. A lot of people overlook regarding how robust ferry service actually is. Longer range, as ferry service hopefully expands, do you see this continuing to be a public-private service? And if so, is HMS going to be the provider, or will this be open to competition from other ferry companies?
I don't know the answer to that question, to tell you the truth. I would imagine that if this operation is successful, there will be others that come to the table interested in providing maybe other routes or other types of services. If you take a look at what's happening in the Hillsborough Basin along the riverfront, there's one type, a small type of ferry that goes up and down. There's electric boats. People have different, people rent scooters or what I call water scooters. There's lots of different ways to move around in that smaller area that helps people use our waterways. And Hillsborough County was founded on two methods of transportation: water and rail. That's how this whole area got developed, because of access to water and helping people get around and go up and down the river at one point in time, which was a major trade route at one point in time before we dammed it up. And as well as the rail lines when Henry B. Plant built the lines that landed into downtown Tampa. So I truly believe that once you build something like this ferry service, that more will come. It's kind of like what was the name of that movie, Field of Dreams? If you build it, they will come.
Exactly.
If you build an effective service that offers convenience, is frequent and reliable, which is one of the major challenges with any transit service, and moves from where people are to where they need to go, people will use transit. They do in almost every other metropolitan area in our country where people need to get from point A to point B. And Hillsborough will be a much better place to live when we're able to see something like this get invested.
Well, projects like these are complex. They take commitment and dedication over a number of years from many people to reach full potential. So what is the next step right now? What's missing or what's needed to keep the longer term vision on track?
Commitment. And honestly, getting it going more so than it already is. One of the things we have seen as a consequence of seeing ridership continue to increase over the years is the being part of how people remember how to get around. Being able to encourage residents to change their normal behavior, which unfortunately for decades and decades and decades means getting in the car and driving from one place to another and fighting traffic all the way there and back, is to choosing a different way. And honestly, in my opinion, once people get used to the opportunity to take a different way to get there, it will thrive and do very well. The other benefit of having a ferry access over large areas that don't get stuck in congestion is being able to connect it to other methods of transportation. So whether it be buses, the streetcar, Ubers, scooters, those mobile skateboards, as I call them, any of the above, if you can use other methods to connect to the ferry, for example, we'll see more and more opportunity for people to utilize the ferry for getting across what is a large body of water that divides our counties and makes it difficult to get around.
Well, Commissioner Overman, we've covered a lot of ground here today. We're just about going to wrap up. Thank you for sharing your insight and information. Is there anything else you want to add, anything that we've missed that you may want our listeners to know about before we wrap up here?
One, I want to thank you very much for the opportunity to share this with you today. I believe that the Hillsborough County residents are really looking forward to seeing improvements in our transportation. And this is one of the many ways to do so. Transportation is not a silver bullet. There's not one silver bullet. Yes, we need to resurface roads. Yes, we need to build sidewalks. Yes, we need more transit, whether that be buses or share rides or carpools or safety rides for the people who have disabilities that need to be able to get to where they need to go, where our students need to go so that they can actually get to school, as well as our military that need to be able to get to the base in a very quick manner. It is critical that we look at every tool in our toolbox and invest in it accordingly, because the people haven't necessarily decided yet they're going to stop coming to Hillsborough. We live in paradise. It is awesome here. And now that we're investing in jobs and different types of economies that is broadening our economy, I don't see people not coming. So we need to make sure that people have the ability to get around so that we put the quality of life that is so important to our families and our businesses and their success foremost in all of the decisions as we move forward. And investing in different methods of transportation is key to the success of the future of Hillsborough County.
Well, that's very well said, and we do share that same philosophy. So thank you for articulating that. Thank you for all those thoughts, and to our listeners, we hope you found this information valuable. My thanks to Hillsborough County Commission Chair Kimberly Overman for taking time to talk today, and to you for tuning in. I'm Chris Jadek, TBARTA Communications Director, and you've been listening to On the Go, the podcast from the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority.